There are moments in life when a person feels as if everything has closed in around them. Doors are shut, hearts feel heavy, and the future looks unclear. In those moments, words become difficult, explanations fail, and even tears begin to run out. Yet, in the most powerful way, Revelation teaches that there is still something left, something simple, something short, but something that carries the weight of miracles. It is a supplication spoken by a prophet in the deepest darkness he ever experienced, not in comfort, not in ease, but inside hardship so intense that no human plan could rescue him. At that moment he turned to his Lord with words that became timeless, words that were not just for him, but for every believer who would ever feel trapped, overwhelmed, or alone. He called out, "There is no God except you. Glory be to you. Truly, I was among the wrongdoers." This is not a long speech. It is not complicated language. Yet it carries something that shakes the heart of every believer who understands it. It begins with absolute affirmation of Tawheed. There is no power, no authority, no rescue except Allah. Then it rises in glorification, acknowledging that Allah is far above any imperfection, any injustice, any flaw. And finally it turns inward, taking responsibility, admitting human weakness and need. This balance is what makes it powerful. It does not blame fate. It does not accuse people. It does not despair. It begins and ends with returning to Allah. When a person repeats this remembrance with sincerity, something shifts inside. The heart that was once restless begins to settle. The mind that was once spinning begins to slow down. Because this remembrance is not just words, it is surrender, and surrender is where relief begins. There is a hidden wisdom in repeating such supplication consistently. When the tongue becomes familiar with remembrance, the heart slowly begins to follow. At first a person may say it while distracted, but with time, something changes. The meaning starts to sink in. The realization grows that no matter how deep the situation, there is still a door that never closes, the door of returning to Allah. Many of the righteous in history would repeat such invocations frequently throughout their day, not because they were told it was a ritual, but because they understood it as oxygen for the soul. Just as the body cannot survive without breath, the heart cannot survive without turning back to its Creator. When life feels easy, a person often forgets this reality. But when difficulty comes, everything else becomes meaningless except this connection. That is why hardship, though painful, often becomes the moment of awakening. It strips away illusions of control and brings the heart back to truth. And the truth is this: Allah hears even the quietest whisper of regret. He responds to even the smallest act of turning back. He opens doors that were never expected to open. Not always immediately, not always in the way a person imagines, but always in a way that carries wisdom, mercy, and protection. The one who holds on to this remembrance does not remain the same. Even if the situation around them does not change instantly, their inner world changes first. And that inner change is the beginning of every outward relief. There is something deeply humbling about these words. When a person says, "Truly, I was among the wrongdoers," it is not meant to break the soul, it is meant to free it. Because acknowledging weakness before the one who is perfect is not humiliation, it is healing. Pride keeps a person trapped, but humility opens the way out. And when this supplication is repeated often again and again throughout the day, it becomes more than a request. It becomes a state of being. The tongue remembers it in moments of stress. The heart reaches for it in moments of confusion. Slowly, it becomes a refuge. A person may be surrounded by problems that seem impossible to solve. Delays, losses, disappointments, or fears about the future may weigh heavily. But this remembrance quietly reminds the soul, you are not alone, and you are not without help. There is a reason such words are described as having the power of miracles. Not because they change reality instantly, but because they change the relationship between the servant and the Creator. And when that relationship is strengthened, nothing remains impossible for the one who controls all outcomes. Even the act of repeating it many times a day carries meaning. It is not about numbers alone. It is about consistency. It is about making remembrance part of breathing, part of thinking, part of reacting. In that repetition, the heart becomes soft again. Hardness begins to dissolve. Despair loses its grip. There will still be tests. There will still be unanswered questions. But the believer who holds on to this remembrance learns something priceless. Peace is not always the absence of struggle, but the presence of trust. Bearing struggle. And trust is built word by word, moment by moment, through turning back again and again, no matter how many times one feels distant or distracted. In the end, what remains is simple: a heart that remembers its Lord, a tongue that does not abandon supplication, and a soul that learns slowly but surely that no situation is beyond mercy, no darkness is beyond light, and no mistake is beyond forgiveness when one returns sincerely. That is where miracles begin, not always outside, but first within. This supplication is not just another set of words to be repeated. It carries the weight of a moment when everything seemed completely closed, and there was no apparent way out. It comes from a situation where even physical means and human effort had reached their limit. That is what makes it so powerful for anyone who hears it today. It is not spoken from comfort or ease, but from the depths of distress where hope is tested and reliance on Allah becomes the only remaining anchor. What makes this dua extraordinary is not only what is said, but the condition in which it was said. It was uttered when a servant of Allah found himself in overwhelming difficulty, surrounded by darkness both literally and emotionally. At that point there was no distraction, no escape, and no reliance on worldly solutions. In that moment of complete vulnerability, the heart naturally turned upward, recognizing that every door had closed except the door of the Creator. This teaches a timeless reality. Some of the most powerful prayers are born in moments when a person has nothing left but sincerity. When human strength ends, divine mercy begins to be fully realized. The dua reflects a state where desperation is not expressed as complaint, but as submission. Instead of questioning destiny or resisting reality, the heart turns toward acknowledgement and humility. It is in such moments that words become pure. There is no pride, no ego, no pretense, only truth. The truth that only Allah can save, only Allah can change what seems unchangeable, and only Allah can bring light into absolute darkness. This realization transforms the dua from a simple expression into a lifeline. For anyone going through difficulty today, this moment carries a message. No situation is too far gone for divine intervention. The conditions in which this prayer was made prove that even when everything seems lost, turning sincerely to Allah can become the beginning of relief. It also reminds the heart that hardship is not a sign of abandonment, but sometimes a doorway that leads a person back to dependence on their Lord. The beauty of this teaching is that it does not require ideal circumstances. It begins exactly where a person is broken, confused, or overwhelmed, and shows that even then, connection with Allah is possible. In fact, it is often in those very moments that the connection becomes the strongest, because it is free from distraction and filled with pure need. At the core of this supplication lies a deep and uncompromising message of Tawheed, the absolute oneness of Allah. It begins by affirming that there is no power, no authority, and no deity worthy of worship except Him alone. This is not just a statement of belief spoken by the tongue, it is a complete shift of reliance within the heart. It is the moment when a person stops depending on creation and fully turns toward the Creator, recognizing that every solution, every relief, and every outcome rests only in His control. When a person reaches a state of distress, the natural human reaction is often to search for multiple sources of help, people, plans, or personal strength. But this supplication redirects that scattered dependence into one singular focus. It removes the illusion that relief can come from anywhere other than Allah. This is where true spiritual clarity begins. The heart stops being divided between hope in people and hope in Allah. Instead, it becomes fully anchored in divine power alone. This declaration also brings a sense of freedom. When everything depends on Allah, nothing in creation holds ultimate control over one's destiny. Fear begins to lose its grip because no situation is outside divine authority. Even the most complicated problems, the most delayed outcomes, and the most uncertain futures are all placed under the same truth: Allah is above all circumstances. The depth of this affirmation is not only theological but deeply emotional. It shifts a person from anxiety to trust. When the heart truly understands that Allah alone is sufficient, the burden of constantly trying to control outcomes begins to ease. The mind becomes less restless and the soul becomes more stable because it is no longer carrying the weight of trying to manage what is beyond human capacity. This statement also corrects the inner balance of reliance. It does not deny effort or action, but it places them in their proper place. Effort becomes a means, not the source of results. Every people become means, not providers of ultimate solutions. Everything is recentered around the reality that only Allah can grant ease, open doors, and bring resolution at the right time. When repeated with sincerity, this affirmation slowly reshapes how a person sees life. Challenges are no longer viewed as absolute barriers, but as situations under divine control. Delays are no longer seen as hopeless, but as moments governed by wisdom. Even uncertainty becomes bearable, because it is no longer every random, it is within the knowledge and decree of the one who is perfect in his planning. Alongside affirming absolute reliance on Allah, this supplication carries a deeply humbling element of glorification and self-accountability. It combines praise of the Creator's perfection with an honest admission of human imperfection. This balance is what gives the dua its emotional and spiritual depth, because it does not stop at asking, it begins by purifying the heart first. When a person says, "Glory be," it is not a casual phrase. It is a declaration that Allah is free from any flaw, injustice, or deficiency. It acknowledges that whatever wisdom is unfolding in a person's life, even if it is not fully understood, it comes from a being who is perfect in knowledge and just in every decision. This removes suspicion from the heart and replaces it with reverence. Instead of questioning divine wisdom, the believer begins to trust it. At the same time, the supplication turns inward with a powerful moment of self-recognition. It acknowledges personal limitation and error. This is not meant to create despair, but clarity. Human beings by nature are prone to mistakes, forgetfulness, and emotional weakness. When a person admits this truth sincerely, it becomes a form of liberation rather than burden. The pressure of pretending to be in control or flawless is removed, and the heart becomes lighter. This combination of praising Allah and recognizing one's own shortcomings creates every bridge between the servant and the Creator. On one side is divine perfection, on the other is human imperfection. And in between lies humility, the key that opens the door to mercy. When arrogance is stripped away, what remains is sincerity, and sincerity is what makes supplication powerful. This moment of accountability also shifts the way a person processes hardship. Instead of constantly looking outward for blame or frustration, the heart begins to look inward with reflection. Not in a destructive way, but in a way that encourages growth, repentance, and awareness. It becomes easier to return to Allah because the ego is no longer resisting. There is also a subtle healing in this admission. Many people carry emotional weight from past mistakes, regrets, or poor decisions. This supplication gently transforms that burden into a pathway back to Allah. Instead of being trapped by guilt, the believer is guided toward repentance and hope in divine mercy. In this way, glorification and self-accountability work together. One elevates the understanding of Allah's perfection, while the other grounds the heart in humility. Between these two, the soul finds balance, and in that balance, sincerity becomes deeper and connection with Allah becomes more real and more transformative. One of the most transformative aspects of this supplication is the way consistency in remembrance reshapes the inner world of a person. It is not only about saying the words during moments of crisis, but also about the actions and behaviors that can help in times of crisis, but about returning to them repeatedly until they become part of daily consciousness. When a person engages in constant remembrance, even a short phrase begins to carry profound meaning over time, slowly changing how the heart reacts to stress, fear, and uncertainty. At first, repetition may feel mechanical. The tongue may move while the mind is distracted, occupied with thoughts of daily responsibilities or unresolved problems. However, something subtle begins to happen with persistence. Every word starts to settle deeper. The heart begins to recognize them. What was once external becomes internal, and what was once routine begins to feel like refuge. This gradual transformation is one of the quiet miracles of consistent remembrance. As this practice continues, emotional reactions begin to soften. Situations that once triggered anxiety or frustration start to feel less overwhelming. The heart becomes more anchored, not because difficulties disappear, but because the inner response to them changes. Instead of immediate panic or despair, there is a moment of pause, a return to trust, and a reminder that control does not belong to the individual. This consistency also builds spiritual resilience. Just as physical strength is developed through repetition, inner strength is formed through repeated turning back to Allah. Each time the remembrance is spoken, it reinforces reliance, even if only slightly. Over time, these small reinforcements accumulate into a stable foundation of faith that is not easily shaken by external circumstances. Another important effect of this repetition is the way it interrupts negative thought patterns. The mind naturally tends to spiral when faced with uncertainty, replaying fears and imagining worst-case scenarios. Regular remembrance acts as a gentle interruption to that cycle. It redirects attention from internal noise to divine reassurance, gradually reducing the intensity of anxious thinking. There is also a deep sense of companionship that develops through this practice. The heart begins to feel that it is not alone in its struggles. Even in silence, there is a connection being maintained. This awareness brings comfort that is not dependent on external validation or support from others. With time, consistency transforms remembrance from an action into a state of being. It is no longer something a person does occasionally, it becomes a lens through which life is experienced. Challenges are met with greater patience, delays with greater acceptance, and blessings with greater gratitude. In this steady rhythm of remembrance, the heart becomes more peaceful, more aware, and more firmly attached to its Creator. Hardship, in its essence, is not only a test of patience, but also a powerful means of awakening the human heart. When life flows easily, a person often becomes absorbed in routines, plans, and expectations, rarely pausing to reflect on deeper realities. Comfort can quietly create distance from remembrance, not because the heart becomes intentionally neglectful, but because it becomes preoccupied. In contrast, difficulty has a way of breaking that state of distraction and bringing the heart back to awareness. When a person faces moments of intense struggle, something shifts internally. The illusions of full control begin to fade. Plans that once seemed certain become uncertain, and reliance on personal strength starts to feel insufficient. In that space, the heart naturally begins to search for something greater than itself. This search is not always immediate or conscious, but it gradually turns the direction of attention upward toward the one who holds all outcomes. This is where hardship reveals its hidden mercy. It strips away false dependencies on people, on circumstances, and even on one's own abilities. What remains is a clearer understanding that true stability does not come from external conditions, but from connection with the Creator. In this way, difficulty becomes a teacher guiding the heart back to its original purpose of reliance and remembrance. There is also a refinement that occurs through this process. Emotions become more honest, prayers become more sincere, and humility becomes more natural. In ease, gratitude is often overlooked. In hardship, even small blessings begin to feel significant. The heart becomes more sensitive, more aware, and more receptive to spiritual truths that were previously ignored or underestimated. Another aspect of this, a reawakening, is the development of patience that is not forced, but formed through experience. A person begins to understand that not everything is meant to happen immediately, and not every delay is a denial. Instead, delays begin to be seen as part of a larger wisdom that is unfolding beyond human perception. This perspective reduces frustration and replaces it with quiet acceptance. Most importantly, hardship creates space for genuine turning back. In moments of ease, remembrance may be occasional, but in difficulty it becomes essential. The heart that once turned away due to distraction finds itself returning out of need. And in that return, a deeper connection is formed, one that is not based on convenience, but on sincerity born from experience. The deepest outcome of this supplication is not limited to external change, but begins with an inner transformation that reshapes how a person perceives life itself. When the heart repeatedly turns toward Allah with sincerity, something subtle yet profound begins to shift. The focus moves from purely seeking change in circumstances to developing a stronger connection with the one who controls all circumstances. In this shift, the definition of relief itself begins to expand. Many people initially associate miracles only with visible solutions, doors opening, problems disappearing, or situations resolving quickly. However, through consistent remembrance and sincere supplication, a deeper understanding forms. A miracle is not only when circumstances change, but when the heart remains calm despite them. It is when confusion exists outside, but clarity begins to grow within. It is when difficulty still surrounds a person, but their internal response no longer collapses under its weight. This transformation does not happen suddenly. It develops gradually through repeated moments of turning back, especially during times of uncertainty. Each time the heart chooses remembrance over despair, trust over panic, and submission over resistance, it becomes slightly stronger. Over time, these small decisions accumulate into a stable inner foundation that is less shaken by external events. Another important aspect of this transformation is the development of spiritual resilience. The heart begins to understand that not every unanswered prayer is a rejection, and not every delay is a loss. Instead, outcomes are seen as part of a broader wisdom that is not always immediately visible. This awareness reduces emotional volatility and replaces it with patience rooted in trust. As this connection deepens,